I first want to open with everyone live long and prosper. And I'm really delighted to join you today to talk about Star Trek because it was relevant 50 years ago, and we're getting a new series in a few months. So it's exciting times.
Yeah, this is super exciting. I mean, I actually only got into it as an adult. So, I mean, even though most of the series were broadcast when we were kids, we were really growing up in that generation, except for the original series. Like, I never actually got into it as an adult. So when did you get into it?
So funny you should ask that. I was thinking about this the other day, and I actually have this really vivid memory of sitting on the couch in our family room, cuddled up with my grandmother. I was about, like 8, 9, and we always used to watch game shows in the afternoon. But after the game shows, Star Trek would come on, and I just remember, those afternoons on the couch with her, watching Picard and his crew on The Next Generation, and that's when it all started, just kind of by accident because she loved it, and she lived with us, and I actually never got a chance to tell her how much those moments really just catalyzed my fandom in my adult life. So I really should do that before she passes.
Wow, yes, it's good on the to-do list. So these were when it was originally airing, or were they reruns?
Well, it was when The Next Generation was originally airing. Yes, so it must have been in the or it might have been some syndicated reruns too, in the early 90s. So
Right,
The Next
because
Generation.
during the day, if it was during the daytime, it was probably syndicated. But yeah, I mean, it was that era.
Right. So a question for you then, like coming in as an adult, how did you get into it?
Yeah, it's really funny because I think it was really the 2009 reboot movie, which really helped get a lot of people into it. Even though obviously stylistically and everything, the 2009 movie was very different than the original. But I think that kind of catalyzed my interest and some other people I knew to get into it as adults. And because a lot of people, being from MIT, a lot of people we knew growing up, like Star Trek and talked about it, but I never really got exposed to it. So then that was around 2009, 2010 was around a good time for me to just start getting into it, because I could just ask friends who had grown up watching it for their recommendations and where they recommend I get started and such. And then I just kind of got hooked from there.
So you got hooked, but so what about the Star Trek universe really like appealed to you or kept you hooked?
I think it was because I mean I started with TNG with The Next Generation, and it was I didn't worry about watching it in order, right? Because they were very episodic, they're independent. You can I just looked online for like most interesting episodes or got people's recommendations for episodes. So I thought they were nicely self-contained, right? And that you could watch it at your own pace. You didn't have to worry about following a 10 season storyline with like 500 characters and all this drama. It was very nicely self-contained. And I just liked it because it was, it was the most sci-fi thing that was on TV, right? Because most shows, even though they're quote unquote sci-fi, they're more action or adventure or drama. But a lot of the TNG episodes, the Next Generation episodes I watched, were the ones I liked more were the pure sci-fi ones, which explored one theme and did it over, an hour. And it was very self-contained. It was almost like a short story.
Mm-hmm. And I think that really hits home, like when Star Trek was able to bring technology and like cultural themes and just bring it all together into what sci-fi, I think one of the strengths is that kind of looking at ourselves now projected into the future, kind of how the issues persist but in a different context and with different technologies and weapons and possibilities. So it's funny because I was a kind of a nerdy kid, and I think when I saw Star Trek, I was like, oh yeah, like that we could have holodecks and transporters, and like these things are so cool. But as an adult now, and realizing that those technologies maybe aren't so far away, makes me appreciate how prescient the series was back then, but also makes me appreciate this for the other things the series did, such as the social commentary on whether it be discrimination or political conflict or social issues. Just having sci-fi as a canvas for that commentary, I think, is really powerful.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think a lot of it, beyond the obvious tech things, were the social commentaries and the fact that even back, in the original series, so long ago, they could sort of use aliens and other worlds as sort of an excuse to sneak these things in. Whereas if you're doing it in real life, these things may not be as acceptable to put on television, but if you're casting these allegories in other worlds, then you could kind of sneak these lessons in, or these viewpoints in more easily.
Exactly, and that's why I'm really curious to see how CBS deals with the upcoming Star Trek Discovery, which is actually, they announced it's premiering September 24th, because I mean our country is so politically polarized right now, and I want to see where the writers take Discovery and how they take this current social political moment and map it onto the conflict in Discovery. I think one of the so apparently it came out maybe 2 or so days ago that kind of a fundamental rule in the Star Trek universe, based on Gene Roddenberry, the creator's original vision, was that members of the crew should never really have like fundamental conflict with each other, and so it's kind of a more harmonious team. But I guess it's been decided that for Star Trek Discovery, that isn't going to be the case, and we'll see conflict in the crew. And I'm really curious to see if we're going to have kind of political discussions among the crew, and how that plays out. And I think if we look back at the Star Trek series that we have up till now, Deep Space Nine, I think is my personal favorite. Not everyone loves it, but I loved it because of its just like unabashed, like, yes, we are going to be political about it, and yes, this is like, it's not going to be pretty, it's going to be gritty, and we're going to deal with some horrible issues of incarceration and slavery and just political corruption. Like it was just like all out, no holds barred.
Yeah, I actually really like Deep Space Nine as well. I actually, my Deep Space Nine story was, I spent, at the end of grad school, I spent a semester at Harvard visiting a professor there and working toward the end of my PhD. I forgot if we met up during that time, but it was like a late 2011, early 2012. Maybe we met up during that. But so that was the end of my PhD, and that was like 4 months, and I did a project there, and I kind of finished up my PhD. It was a really fun time. And what I did there was, every night I would just come home and watch Deep Space Nine. I made it a point to watch it start to end, right? So
okay.
Even through some of the not great episodes that are kind of groaner inducing, I just sat through every single one, and it was great. I mean, obviously it ramped up toward the second half with the continuity of the storylines, but it was really great. I mean, it was really great to see it. It started out kind of being a quasi TNG, let's just explore these characters, see what's going on, and then really it started kicking up with the war and the continuity and everything. And yeah, I mean, there were some amazing episodes, and I'm really curious to see how this new series goes and what they take, the path that they take with it.
Yeah, I mean, how have you what were your reactions when you well, I don't know, have you seen the internet troll reactions of like, oh, white genocide in space, like every kind of people not so terribly happy about the much needed diversity in the cast?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to happen with Arian, with the recent Star Wars as well. With I think this is. I mean, I think that one of my fears is that this new show may not do well just because it's such a different time, right? That maybe due to criticism or due to other things, that maybe that all these series flourished in the late '80s and mid '90s because it was just somehow magically the right time for it. And I'm hoping it's the right time again. But given I haven't really kept up to date with popular media nowadays, but is there I'm just thinking, is there an enough of an audience and a market for kind of thoughtful, deep, meaningful sci-fi nowadays versus just 2-second clickbait and internet trolling on Reddit nonstop?
Right. And I was wondering the same thing, but then I think of two other popular series, sci-fi series. I don't know if you're familiar. It's The Expanse on the Sci-Fi Channel, and Dark Matter, which is also on the Sci-Fi Channel. But The Expanse has had such rich critical acclaim, and it's based. Are you familiar?
It's funny because I talked about another podcast. Someone mentioned it, but you should have mentioned it again, because I actually haven't seen it myself, but I've heard it mentioned before. So you should talk about it.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. So season 1 is on Amazon Prime right now, and then season 2 just concluded. And it is based on James S. A. Corey's trilogy of novels called The Expanse. And it's essentially, there's Earth, there's Mars, and then there's the asteroid belt. And pretty much they're all at war. And it's geopolitical. The asteroid belt is in a way their labor is exploited, and it mirrors a lot of our current day conflict. And so it's just really, I mean, the writing is great because it doesn't shy away from, refugee situations, militaristic, militaristic operations, and both in the book and in the TV series. And but aside from just the story arc, it's just beautifully filmed, and the CGI, like for a TV series, I'm like, whoa, where's funding coming from? But there's been, so the point being that there has been a lot of interest in The Expanse and a lot of acclaim, and the fact that there's a steady fandom behind that, it makes me hopeful that when Discovery comes out, and if it chooses to be more edgy and less optimistic, or deal with darker issues, that there will still be an audience for it. But maybe if it keeps with more of the Star Trek optimism that was more emblematic of all the shows in the past, in the 80s and 90s, early 2000s, I don't know, maybe that's something we need too now, because not many people are happy.
So. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these shows, I mean, Westworld is another example of these sorts of higher budget, more cinematic kind of this run up to, the 10 episodes a season, with things like Westworld and things that are commissioned by HBO and Netflix. This is almost kind of like blurring the lines between TV and movies, right? So yeah, it's interesting to see how this landscape goes. I mean, I'm hoping for the best, but it's hard to tell because it's been so many years since a real Star Trek series. And there have been the reboot movies, but those have more been kind of blockbuster, one-off movies rather than a series.
Right. So I'm curious about that, because you got in with the movies, and the movies are, they're a completely different alternate universe than the rest of the Trek universe. And having been like a diehard fan with all the I guess the core canon series, you would call them, I love the reboot, but I wonder, like, are the fans who come in because of the reboot, who, like, that's the universe they know, can they relate to the other series, and would they become devoted fans of the older series, or is there going to be a sort of division in the fandom?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. I mean, I think for me and for others, it's sort of a gateway drug in the sense of getting you introduced to the world so that you explore other stuff on your own, right? And acknowledging that it's different enough that, it's different enough in a different era. And it's also funny because I actually have not seen much of the original series. I mean, I watch a little bit here and there, but I haven't seen like everything, right? So for me, the rebooted movies aren't really in conflict with the original series because I don't really watch original series much. So it's and all the other series was like 80 years or so after the reboot and the original series in the 60s. So so for me, it didn't really seem to conflict. Like I didn't say like, oh wow, this is completely different. And and like we're talking about, stylistically is so different as well. So like it seems like a different world. But it's yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. So do you know if they're making more movies in the rebooted universe, or is that there's no talks about that?
I actually am not sure. I would really hope so, because I think Beyond opened up questions about I guess this general Star Trek universe, as it is, I guess, in the reboot, and kind of I would love to see more world building around that. Okay, let me just say, the fact that women have pants, like I was so happy. I was like, yes, you didn't give them skirts, because really, why is the skirt that is like riding up really close to that problematic area, like it's just not useful or safe, or so I was just overjoyed to see that.
It's an occupational hazard as well. Yeah,
it really is. I mean, OSHA of the of Starfleet would be really disappointed. So yeah. Wait, what was like? But about the women in pants. So when you said about the you hadn't really watched the original series, but there are many people who would disagree with me, but I don't know if the original series is worth it. Like, I have been, I swallowed the pill and I was like, I'm going to watch the original series. And right now I'm like 3 episodes away from finishing all 3. It has been painful. It has been so painful. Like the blatant misogyny in some episodes, I just like, I can't. I find myself screaming at the TV. I'm like, this is not supposed to be the experience I want with Star Trek, it's just it's so bad. And I understand that was what the 60s, that those were cultural norms in the 60s, but man, it's just bad sometimes.
Yeah, so maybe
So
it's actually good that, I didn't and others didn't start with the original series, because I thought, most of the series were centered in the 80s and 90s. So that was, for me, that was what, that was the core. I mean, the Next Generation was really the core of that universe. So, and, I've seen some of the original series things, but it was, it looked like kind of, cheesy 1960s style things. It was lauded in those days as being, progressive in some ways, but, that was 50 years ago, right? So, I guess we don't normally watch other TV shows from 1960 either, right? Because if you watch other contemporary shows of that era, it would be, just as bad in in those contemporary days.
exactly. And I think so. Actually, last week I saw a performance of one of the original series episodes. It was a live kind of voice acting performance, but it was gender swapped.
Interesting.
So, the majority of the cast was female, and then you had like a spattering of male characters, and it was just, it really brought to light like how bad the sexism was when it was women making the jokes. And yeah, so I'm really happy to know that Discovery has women in leading roles. We have the captain, the main characters. I believe she's lieutenant commander or lieutenant. It's just really refreshing. And the fact that we have Wonder Woman, at this time, I think it's opening the door for young girls to see like, oh yeah, A, I can be in a leadership position. B, I can openly love this, sci-fi and comics, and just having that visibility, that inclusion, it as a woman of color, like, it means a lot to me. So I'm really happy.
Yeah, and that's why I think a lot of us are hoping that the show is successful, and given this time and age, that there is enough of an audience. One of, again, I'm not an expert on media, but one of my fears is because there's so much noise and so many shows coming on and so many online media things, so many sorts of things, it might be easy to get drowned out. But because back in around the Next Generation era, there wasn't much else on TV that was like that, right? There was like cheesy Quantum Leap like shows and other sorts of adventure campy sort of things, but there wasn't like a serious sci-fi show with good acting, right, and good production value. But nowadays, there are so many high budget blockbuster type shows that I'm just hoping that Discovery has enough of the momentum to kind of keep that going, because the success of Wonder Woman and the recent Star Wars and everything, and I think there is a positive momentum there. I'm hoping for the best in the coming year.
I know, fingers crossed. Well, so I have a question for you. Now you have watched all the series then, except the original series,
Yeah, except
right?
the original, yeah.
Okay. Is there a particular captain that you feel you really admired their leadership more so than the others?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always viewed Star Trek as more of an ensemble cast. I mean, obviously there's, there are leading figures in every one, but yeah, I don't know. I never viewed the show. Okay, so maybe because I didn't watch it as a kid, so I didn't have, someone to look up to as a kid. But that's a great question, because they're all different and they all have really interesting qualities. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't be, and I remember seeing these panels, right, where there's like the captain's panels where they all go on stage, and yeah, I think they're really interesting. But I actually really like Voyager as a series. I mean, a lot of people I didn't watch Voyager until pretty late, because a lot of people are like, it's like, it's okay, it's kind of campy in parts and stuff. But it was actually, I enjoyed it a lot, all right, and I enjoyed the captain a lot, and that show, and how they dealt with a lot of issues and conflict and stuff.
Yes, I loved Voyager too. I love the fact that its entire premise is two opposing crews that were fundamentally enemies have to work together, and you're in a shitty you're in a dire situation, and you need to get home, and you got to put your differences aside. And I think that's a great premise. And then the character like B'Elanna Torres in Voyager just really spoke to me. I guess I must have been a teenager. I was a teenager when I was watching it, and I think I was really struggling a lot with being mixed ethnicity and having parents who are like from really different backgrounds. My mother's Filipino and my father's Pakistani, and so culturally different ends of the spectrum. And Balana, being half Klingon and half human, there were several episodes about her struggling with that mixed identity and not being able to show her Klingon side when she's among humans, and so seeing her struggle made me realize that, like, it's going to take strength and it's always going to be hard, but you just need to find ways to mitigate that and cope with it, and to eventually embrace that mixed identity. And I hadn't realized it until I was an adult, how much of an impact that made on me. But I realize now that Balana, in a way, is one of the very few like mixed characters that I remember from that time in popular media. And so so thank you, writers of Voyager, who wrote Balana's character.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting because but this kind of gets back to our earlier point about how I felt like the shows weren't as much captain centered as as a kind of ensemble cast centered, because there, like you're saying with Balana, like there were episodes that focus on individual characters, and there were great episodes where one of the non-captain characters was the lead, and I really enjoyed that. And because they had this kind of longer series and more leeway to play with, they could have episodes feature individual characters more, and it wasn't always just about the main plot, right? Because a lot of these more epic shows, quote unquote, if you're only doing 10 episodes a season and you're it's more cinematic, you can't just devote a whole show to a side character or to a minor character. You have to move the main story along. So that's why I'm a little bit, for these kinds of quote unquote more epic shows that are 10 episodes now, I'm a little bit more afraid that they won't be able to play with the people on the side as much, and they may have to focus the main story. But we'll see what happens, because these seasons were like they were 20 something episodes a season, so that gave you a lot of room to play with, which is great.
Yes, exactly. But it's curious you should say the word epic, because like the original epic, right, was a long heroic poem, right? And in a way, I think Star Trek is epic in the sense of not the journey home or the journey outwards, but it's the journey within. Like each person's individual epic of what they have to deal with and discover and reconcile with, in the context of aliens and battles and explosions in space. But to your point of like exploring that individual growth, we see all these characters from different backgrounds, different alien species, and different cultures, and how people deal with things in their own unique ways. And it's okay that you deal with things differently. And I really appreciated that about the series. So we all have our own epic journey.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think that's the kind of classic. It's sort of the classic, storytelling 101 of, having characters that that the audience cares about is really, is storytelling 101, right? You could have the most, best special effects and all the, all the plot twists and suspense and action in the world, but if no one actually cares about the characters at its core, then it feels kind of hollow. So I think that's a great point.
Exactly. Yeah. But I mean, when you said like 10, the 10 episodes like cinematic arc that is oftentimes popular now, I have hope because have you seen The Handmaid's Tale?
I have not.
Okay. Just go watch The Handmaid's Tale. But so it was it was a 10 episode arc on Hulu. Wonderful adaptation of Margaret Atwood's original book. So very sci-fi dystopian and the such. But they managed to have a long, an overarching story, but still episodes were very character centered, even though it was the first season and only 10 episodes.
Oh, wow.
So I feel if filmmaking can do that now, Discovery can do that as well.
Yeah, I'm hoping for the best. So do you know who is involved in the writing and the production of the show? Like, is it part of the, people from some of the original kind of the 90s series, or are they brand new sort of people?
I'm not entirely sure. I know Brian Fuller was brought on board to begin with, but then he left the show, left the crew, or the writing crew and production crew. So the showrunners now, I'm not sure if they were affiliated with the original ones, but
yeah, because I think there's a lot of production drama. They got delays and had other things, and Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? I mean, hopefully it'll all come together in the end. But it's there's a lot of expectations riding on it too, right?
There are, and sometimes when things are disappointing and you have those high expectations, I don't know. I just don't want to think about it because
Yeah.
I think I love it too much that even if it falls short of expectations.
So let's talk about not to bias things. So what about the Enterprise series then? Because that was right when we started college around, right? So did you follow everything up to there and watch Enterprise as well? And what did you think about that switch
I
over?
did watch Enterprise. I thought it was narratively, I thought it was an interesting take to kind of go backward and tell that backstory of how we came to be the Federation. Um, we had it wasn't the most diverse cast, nor did the women. I mean, T'Pol, who was the first officer and who was a Vulcan, she had a leading part, but she was pretty much it. And it it was okay. I think there were select episodes that were moving, and but for the most part, I think Enterprise struggled, and I think it was the only of the so the original series had 3 seasons.
Right.
Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager each had 7, and then Enterprise only had 4. So I think we can safely say that
Yeah,
everyone
and I'm
agreed.
wondering if part of that is, maybe because I mean, maybe we're biased because we grew up in that generation, right? It's like people around our age who grew up in the 80s and 90s, like the TNG, sorry, the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager were the core series of our childhood, and then by the time Enterprise came along, we were a bit older too. We were in college. The sensibilities had changed. This is kind of a post 9/11 world. There are other sorts of adventure-ish sci-fi things like Battlestar Galactica and the reboot of Battlestar and other things on, and maybe it's sort of run its course that it, they try to be different. Obviously, I think that was good that they try to be different, but perhaps it's just maybe as a generational thing, right? That all of us grew up loving those 3 central series in our childhood, and as we aged out of it, it's really hard to get it into it the same way. Maybe.
I agree. And I also think though that Enterprise, it just the quality wise, like it being a different time and us being a different age, I definitely played into it. But really, just where did the writing staff go?
Yeah, so maybe it's because the people, the best people and the best stuff were all kind of used up in a way, right? They've already been working on it for a decade or more, and then they wanted to keep extending. I mean, it's sort of like how even single shows, right? Like, there's oftentimes, shows that kind of I can't think of any good examples off its head, but like, they keep, the network wants to keep on milking the money, so they keep on extending it for a few more seasons, and then the last 2 or 3 seasons are never great. So it almost felt like Enterprise was in the meta level, right? We had 3 amazing series, and then let's try to go for another one, but if we just couldn't put it all together into something new.
So hopefully that won't be the case for Discovery, and that I mean there has been so much planning and preparation for this series. It better be one cohesive narrative. So
Right.
we'll
Um,
see.
yeah, and it's interesting because I kind of got it because I got into all of this as an adult and I never actually went through it in my childhood, but I can kind of, from talking to friends and talking to you here, I kind of try to relive that in a surrogate form because I remember friends talking about it when I was growing up. I just somehow never fully got into it, right? Like I was aware of the fact that Star Trek was on TV throughout my whole childhood, but I just never really got into it just because I didn't have the right peer influence or parents who liked it or relatives. So, but I'm glad that I was able to get into it as an adult.
Well, it's funny though that you should say that because it kind of, like you said, it was, people were mentioning it around you, but maybe you weren't as invested in it. But the idea of Star Trek is in the culture milieu of things. And so, when I go out in public and wear my Star Trek uniform, like, I'll get people passing by being like, just giving me the Vulcan salute. I went to a networking event for like product managers and such, and I was like, you know what? There are going to be 600 people there. I need to stand out. No one's going to remember each other. And so I wore my Star Trek uniform. I was the only one in costume, of course. But but people would be like, oh, hey, like I love your dress, and they might not have been Star Trek fans, but they knew what the uniform
Yeah,
was.
totally. Yeah,
So yeah.
and I always like watching a lot of the the stuff around it, right? Like documentaries about conventions and panels and stuff. So I got into a lot of the meta stuff as well. And have you ever watched Galaxy Quest?
I did. Yes. I saw
So that
Galaxy.
was highly recommended to me around the time I was getting into Star Trek, and I thought it was hilarious. And again, even though I did not watch the original series, and it was more of a, it was more of a parody of William Shatner in the original series, but yeah, Galaxy Quest is something that yeah, and it was it's kind of this what happens to people 20 years after the show goes off the air, and they're going to these conventions and such.
It's amazing that they still have the annual Star Trek cruise and annual Star Trek convention, and I haven't been to a Star Trek convention specifically in years, but I don't know, maybe one day.
Yeah, so I guess in our last few minutes to wrap up, what would be your recommendation for someone who is, adult now? So someone perhaps like myself who has, who obviously knows about Star Trek, but who has never actually sat down and been invested in watching the shows. How would you imagine them getting started? Why would they be motivated to get started? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think less of Star Trek as kind of the big monster to conquer, and like where is that hole, and to but more of, okay, well, you have a variety of things, like which flavor would you like to try? You need something to fill your time? Well, here's 7 seasons of 20 episodes each. And I would ask questions of, do you consider yourself more of a person who enjoys an optimistic outlook on life, and maybe if so, then maybe the next generation is your thing, or do you kind of like the gritty political dramas, or then maybe Deep Space Nine, or I don't even know how to characterize Voyager. I would say, like, I think Voyager is really good on character study. Like, if you would, if you want to become really invested in certain individuals who are lost, and you kind of see them grow and explore with them, Voyager. And so I think it's more, I'm not going to recommend the original series, but let's not even go there.
Or Enterprise.
But yeah, I think, to each his own. I think that's the power of Star Trek, is that it offers so much in many different flavors while still being in one universe. So, just dive in where you feel most comfortable.
Yeah, I think it's a great closing note to end on. And I think that's what, when I've tried to get friends involved, I would, I basically follow the same strategy you have, because I think one fear is if there's no direction, they just start watching some random one, season 1 of The Next Generation. They're like, what is this? This is so random. It's like, it's kind of awkward. It's kind of random. And I'm just watching from episode 1, and I don't really like this, because a lot of the episodes are mixed, right? Not all of them are great. Some of them are really cheesy or campy. And if you just happen to hit on some bad ones in the beginning, or ones that, not necessarily bad, but they don't fit your kind of preferences, it might be a turnoff. So I think having a guide, such as yourself, may be the best way.
Well, if anyone wants to tweet me at Aayesha, by all means.
All right, yeah, we'll put your information online. You can be the online Star Trek, gateway drug consultant or something.
I mean, I'm not just as a caveat, I am not the most like diehard trivia fan. Like, I can't name every individual detail of things that as many others can, but I do love it from the bottom of my heart.
Or like sort all the ships by size or something like that,
Not quite that level.
All right, well, thank you so much, Aayesha. We'll go offline. We'll chat more. Thanks.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.